Hey, what's up, guys? John here. I'm sitting here with Dennis Block. He's evicted over 240,000 tenants in the state of California. And as we all know, the state of California has gone mad the last couple of years. And it's been a real clown world for a lot of landlords, and the lot's changing. So we're going to talk with Dennis and talk about what's really happening behind the scenes that maybe the mainstream media is not covering, so we can make smart, well-informed decisions if you're thinking about investing in LA. Hey, Dennis.
Hey, how are you, John? Thanks for having me.
Yep, you got it. So how long have you been an attorney?
This is actually my 43rd year of being an attorney.
Got it. So what have you seen over the last, 20 years? Has it been a slow erosion of landlord rights in LA?
It's not only LA, but it's the entire state of California. Every piece of legislation by either a local municipality or on a state level has been to try to do away with property rights. Mm-hmm. For some reason, the industry, the income property industry, has been vilified by the media, by our politicians, and it's the only industry where we're seeing legislation piece after piece coming after us. For example, in the no other industry in the entire United States has price controls except for one industry, and that would be income property owners. The theory that our industry is so vital for humans that it needs to be controlled. Well, you know something? Drugs are vital for society. Baby formula is vital for society, but they don't have any price controls. But somehow it's popular with politicians to have our property rights determined by some piece of legislation, as opposed to doing it on the free market. I mean, that's the basis upon which our country was founded. The Pilgrims came here not for religious freedoms. They came here for economic freedom, and economic freedom was based on owning land. And somehow now it is so popular for every governmental agency to see what they can do to chip away at our property rights. And that's really what's happening nowadays, John.
It's a really unfortunate situation. Are you seeing that ramp up tenfold over the last 3 years, or has it just been gradually every single year just a little bit worse?
No, actually, it's just since the pandemic, when landlords could not basically do an eviction for 4 years. And for 4 years, landlords could not enforce their contractual rights. So a tenant, for example, in Los Angeles, literally could have gone 4 years without paying rent, where landlords were powerless to enforce their contracts rights or bring forth an eviction. And quite frankly, why should that have been put solely on the shoulders of landlords? If in fact these people truly had a need because of the pandemic that went for 4 years, if they did, then that should have been split between all the taxpayers. But what they did was they individually made one landlord support one tenant. So many times we would see landlords where this unit owes me $40,000, this unit owes me $25,000, and it just goes on and on. Individual people supposed to support other individual people. Nowhere in our society has something like this occurred. Now, of course, the politicians said that, oh, no, we're not saying that you're going to have to give them rent. We're just going to say that it's deferred rent. Well, sure. Yeah, after 4 years, you're going to bring forth a lawsuit and attempt to find where the tenant is now living. So everyone knew, God knows, the politicians knew that this was just going to be a total theft of rent. And there are a couple of lawsuits right now against the city of Los Angeles, which, quite frankly, if they're held in favor of the landlords groups that have brought them, then the city will really be in a poor situation, because quite frankly, what we just saw is just a theft of property rights. And how many times a week? I would say 3-4 times a week, I would get a phone call from a landlord where he would state that, my tenant who hasn't paid rent in a year and a half, he just bought a brand new car. He just bought a brand new car. I'd hear that 3 or 4 times. Well, of course the tenant bought a brand new car because they didn't have to pay the rent. And this had nothing to do In 95% of the cases, it had nothing to do with an inability to pay because of COVID. Had nothing to do with that. Maybe the first year you could say a lot of people were out of work, but after that, for the next 3 years, the city of Los Angeles and other municipalities enforced these insane COVID rules that basically just stole money from landlords.
It's a tragedy, is what's happening to landlords right now in the state of California. And to me, it seems like this is probably just the beginning of the clown show that we're witnessing. I'm hearing all of these different things happening down the pipeline, but for many of these landlords, they won't even make it to that world. Many of these landlords are probably going to be forced to sell in the coming year or 2 years or 3 years. Did you see a lot of landlords being forced to sell the last couple of years?
One example comes to mind of a person who was of retirement age, had one duplex as his source of income, and both tenants for over 3 years did not pay the rent. Who could survive? If you're a real estate broker, for example, and you earned your commission, but there is a law that says, well, you can get your commission, in 4 years down the line, assuming you can find out who owes you that commission. So we would see this over and over again. But you know what? I don't want to talk just about the little guy, the poor guy who really, like that client who owned the duplex, and that was his only source of income. It doesn't matter whether you have 2 units or whether you have 40,000 units. You can't make rules based on somebody who had their time and did it very well and gained a level of success. Success is not something to be hated. It's something to be proud of. So these laws should be affecting everybody, whether you have 2 units or 1,000 units. I have clients that have 40,000 units, and they are entitled to the same protection of the laws as if a guy who has only 2 units.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. What are you seeing in terms of cost for someone during that eviction moratorium? Would they have to file and then just wait, or would they just sit on their hands until?
Well, we saw time and time again that tenants who really had no reason were going to work every single day, but of course used the COVID card to not pay rent. What did landlords do? Well, you weren't allowed to bring forth a civil lawsuit. You weren't allowed to bring forth an eviction. So you just basically had to sit and wait and hope that the other tenants in the building were moral enough to pay the rent. But we saw so many tenants that either as soon as the moratorium was over in Los Angeles on February 1st, 2023, as soon as the moratorium was over, magically 2 things happened. Either tenants just left, so you're not going to know where to sue them. And by the way, you still can't even bring forth a lawsuit for previous rent owed prior to February 1st, 2023 until February 1st, 2024. You got to wait another year for your rent. But on February 1st, these tenants did have to start paying rent. So what did they do? Magically, the COVID wasn't affecting them come February 1st of 2023. So they either paid the rent or a lot of them just left. So that's what we're seeing. So we are doing many evictions based on non-payment of rent because some of these tenants just got into the habit of not paying any rent since they hadn't paid it for 2-3 years. So February came around and they still didn't pay the rent. And now we're, of course, doing many evictions based on current rent that's owed.
Got it. Yeah, many people invest in real estate. They don't realize that where you invest matters almost more than the investment itself. In Los Angeles, for example, if you buy rent-controlled, like an old rent-controlled building with protected tenants, it's a completely different type of risk than if you bought something in South Florida or you bought something somewhere else. How would you explain rent control to someone that has no idea what it is?
I would tell them to go find a different state to purchase your property in, because rent control obviously sits there and controls your income, where if you have the wherewithal to rent out a unit and the unit is legitimately worth $2,500, $2,800, but you have a tenant who's paying $1,100, well, you're basically supporting that tenant $1,400 a month, the difference, for the rest of that tenant's life. And why should one member of society be forced to support another member of society? So for those investors who go out there and they know nothing about rent control, we see this when they call my office and they say, gee, this is a good deal for the building and I know I could get more rents. Well, you're right. You could get more rents if the tenant vacated. So we see situations where they're like a deer in headlights. They didn't realize this. They've already bought the building. They didn't do their due diligence. So if you are going to buy a building, number one, figure out what jurisdiction you're in, making sure whether there's rent control or not, making sure that whatever the rents are coming in, and this is a rent control building, make sure you're happy with those rents, because the chances of being able to increase rents are very difficult. In the city of Los Angeles, incredulously, even the tenants who are paying the rent, they're on a month-to-month tenancy, the place should definitely go up, and God knows that our expenses went up, didn't they?
Yep, taxes, insurance companies are leaving, insurance going up.
Just try hiring a plumber to see what it costs now. So these people were not able in the city of Los Angeles to increase rent for 4 years. Can you increase rent now on a rent-controlled unit? And the answer is no. So from March of 2020 through February of 2024, next year, you had no rent increases. Who could survive without rent increases? Did anybody notice that, I don't know, the price of gas went up a little bit? Now it's up to $6 a gallon. How about when you go into the market? How about when you hire any workmen? But landlords, that different animal of society, the pariah of society, if you believe our politicians or the media, they're forced to go without any kind of a rent increase for 4 years in the city of Los Angeles. This is insane. And then what the city council of Los Angeles is saying is that in February of 2024, so we're still months away, you are going to get, after 4 years, a whopping 7% rent increase. This, ladies and gentlemen, is just insanity in terms of trying to run a business, which is supposed to be in a capitalist society, a free economy, and yet one industry is slated to be the bad guys. And we provide housing for people. We're the good guys, okay? Ours is very necessary. And if you think about it, our industry, without question, is the largest industry in all of the United States. And if you don't believe me, if you think it's the car industry or farming or other types of industry like the tech, if you don't believe me, it's really simple. All you do, walk outside your door and look to the left and look to the right, and you're going to see income property. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you're standing unless you're in the middle of the Mojave Desert. So to take advantage of one segment, and again, if you want to be the social welfare guy, you want to take care of people, you think that people deserve this type of help, then that should be split by all of society in terms of social welfare. And if you take it a step further, who is entitled to social welfare? Who? You have to have a person who has demonstrated a need for it. You have to demonstrate a need. If I'm making $300,000 a month and I'm in a rent-controlled property, I still get the same protection as the guy who's only earning $42,000. There's no showing of need. So the whole concept of rent control is truly insane, and this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I got an email from you a couple of years ago saying that something about a tenant paying $50,000 a month, and they moved in, they just stopped paying. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, we've seen so many of those stories where people not just get like a $2,000 a month apartment. Actually, I'm dealing with a house on Mulholland that we just finally finished the eviction. This was in the city of Los Angeles on Mulholland, a mansion, and the guy was getting $18,000 a month, playing the COVID card, of course, and then we ultimately evict him because when February came around, he still didn't pay the rent. You know, it's one thing to say, you know, I'm the downtrodden and I can't really pay this, but why be in a unit that's $18,000 a month? And if you're the homeowner and you're trying to support a mortgage payment and you're getting zero money in, how do you think that's going to fly?
Right. What do you think is the big premise behind Karen Bass's movement towards, quote unquote, the homelessness emergency that she declared the day after she took office?
Well, obviously there is a homeless emergency, but I don't think it has much to do with money. I think it has to do with drug use, and I think it has to do with mental health issues. And that's the reason why most people are living on the street. And that's where I think the money should play into, but they pass things like, quote, the mansion tax, where all of a sudden, oh my God, you're selling a place for $5 million. Well, you need to get taxed more than anybody else. It's not that in California we're not taxed more than any other state with the exception of New York, but now if you're selling a property. So what do you think that does to building of property, our property industry here? And who is going to want to build and construct property in California when you have these limitations? There's going to be another initiative on the ballot come November of 2024. They want to do away with Costa-Hawkins. Costa-Hawkins is one of the few bills that supports landlords that states that for a single-family residence, a condominium, or a townhouse, there are no rent limitations. When I say there's no rent limitations, there are always rent limitations. It's the marketplace. You know, John, you couldn't sell your car that you drove up here in for $3 million. You could certainly put it for sale for $3 million, but you wouldn't get anybody to buy it. So things sell for what they're supposed to go for, and the same thing is true for rents. If I'm selling a house and the house is worth $2 million, I can't put it up for $4 million. No one's going to buy it. So this is where we're dealing with. So this Costa-Hawkins said that for townhouses, condominiums, and single-family homes, there could be no rent limitations. Costa-Hawkins also did one more thing. Regardless of what type of a residential unit you have, under rent control or not, there was something called vacancy decontrol. That when a tenant finally moved out, thank God, he left that $1,100 apartment that I could get $2,500 for, Costa-Hawkins guaranteed that I could raise the rent to market value for a vacant unit. We're not protecting anybody. The tenant's gone. So who are we protecting? Well, this bill that's this initiative that's going to be on the ballot, which has already been on the ballot twice before and lost, wants to do away with Costa-Hawkins, which means that municipalities like Los Angeles will do a march step to, number one, put rent limitations on condos, townhouses, and single-family homes. And they'll also probably want to do away with vacancy decontrol, that a landlord with a vacant unit is going to be told by Big Brother, Karen Bass, and the other henchmen in this city that you cannot get fair market value for a vacant unit. Ladies and gentlemen, this tenant, I forget what they call it, like the Tenant Protection Act, which will be on the ballot. Anybody listening to me, please do whatever you can. Tell everybody that we got to vote this down for the third time.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. Do you think that ULA tax, how they pivoted? They said initially it was going to be for homelessness, but then ultimately they pivoted most of those funds towards tenant advocacy network. Is that right?
Of course, everything they can to funnel these monies to places that will then hurt income property owners. I mean, that's what they're going to do. It's just a total money grab by the city. The city also has instituted a bunch of tactics so that every landlord will lose their eviction case. They put in all these, what we call them here, gotchas, so that if you serve a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, for the time I could, I mean, I'm allowed to do that now, and you serve that, you wait 3 days, the tenant legitimately pays, doesn't pay you, and says, I have no reason to pay you, I just don't want to pay you. You file that with the court, you've already lost your case. Well, how is that? Well, under the new city rules, I have to write how many bedrooms are in a 3-day notice. If I don't write how many bedrooms are in the 3-day notice, I would lose my case. You also have to fill out a form, an eviction cover sheet form, and that form has to be sent in with a copy of the 3-day notice to the city within 3 days of the service of the notice. You don't do that, you're going to lose your case. Why does the city need to see every 3-day notice, whether it's for rent or for a violation of the contract? Why does the city of Los Angeles need to see that every single notice? One reason only. They want to put some traps in the system so that landlords will lose their case. That's the only basis for this. And there's one more. If you thought that wasn't enough, there's a sign that needs to be posted on all residential properties informing the tenants of their, quote, tenant protection rights. If you don't have this sign posted, you lose your case. So even if your property is not under rent control, It's a brand new building. It's not under rent control. It doesn't make any difference. You have to have this sign posted in a conspicuous spot on the property. So by the mailboxes or maybe in the laundry room. But what if you're a CEO of some great new software company and you rent a mansion in Brentwood for $75,000 a month, and you're happy, pays your rent, shake hands, sign the contract, and as the landlord's walking out of the property to be in compliance with the city of Los Angeles, I got a post on that front door, this eviction protection 2-page colored form. You think the tenant's going to want to have that form there on that house?
Right.
So we're seeing craziness by the city to not only invade property rights, but to try to ensure that most landlords will lose their eviction case without question on just some technical reason.
Do you think they're doing this for a reason because the ultimate goal is to acquire a lot of these mom and pop properties and they're making it very challenging for them to stay in business?
I think that is the ultimate goal, that they will, unless you're the big institutions, the ones that everybody tends to hate the most because their success, I don't know what it is, it's upside down world now.
Yeah.
Success is bad.
Right.
Poverty is good. I don't understand when we were growing up, it was supposed to try to get ahead, pick yourself up. I myself have a law firm where I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment with my mother and my sister. I now employ 26 attorneys, and I have a support staff, a total staff of 45 people that are making their contributions to the government, paying their taxes. But somehow, if you're big, if you're successful, then all of a sudden you're not revered by society, you're hated by society.
Yeah, I think that's just going to continue to get worse as inflation continues to persist, the world gets more expensive, and the haves and have-nots get further divided. This is going to be something that over time, I think over a short period of time in Los Angeles, we're going to start to see things really ramp up against property owners far past anyone's imagination. And I'm wondering how this is all going to play out with interest rates, because a lot of these property owners have to refinance over the next year or two. And they're going to be refinancing in an environment with rent freezes, increased insurance, increased taxes, increased cost. I mean, their trailing 12 is going to look horrible, and they're likely going to have a hard time getting that loan.
And then you're stuck without a rent increase for 4 years, and then you get a whopping 7% rent increase one time come February of 2024. So it's truly an intent to put everybody out of business. And then all that's going to mean is that the corporations will swoop up and own all this property, or the city will do their part to become owners of this property, knowing that they're the ones who put these people out of business.
Yeah, they said they have a goal. It's public. They have a goal of adding 800,000 affordable units. And the only way in which they're going to be able to do that is they're not going to build enough ADUs. They're not going to convert all these different office buildings. They're going to likely acquire a lot of these mom and pop properties. And so people aren't well informed. They don't know what's going on. They could be acquiring your property. So if you're thinking about learning about or exploring real estate in Los Angeles, buying rental properties, feel free to reach out to Dennis. I worked with him in 2017. That's how I originally came across him. He helped me with an eviction, and the tenant was absolutely off the wall, but it ultimately worked out. So feel free to reach out to Dennis. I'll leave all of his contact below, and great connecting with you, Dennis.
Hey, nice talking to you, John.